Hello, and welcome to Research the News. If you're a regular listener of the show, you know that sometimes we have guests on that we may disagree with on policy issues, and sometimes we just want to explore a topic that isn't getting enough coverage in the media. Today, we're exploring. And what we're going to explore is literacy, specifically with US students. And in my research, I found some crazy stats. The literacy rate among adults in the US is 88%, which means that 12% of the people in this country aren't able to read, and 54% of adults aren't proficient. And the percentage of fourth grade public school students performing at a proficient level in reading is only 34%. And the best way to summarize this problem is a quote from today's guest. Imagine being in the Bronze Age and not having bronze, or being in the Iron Age without iron. Well, we're in the information age, and if you can't read, you can't access information. And this is powerful. Imagine not being able to read or type, or imagine struggling every time you need to do these things. If you're illiterate or not proficient, this will either be a struggle or impossible. And you think this would be a really difficult problem to fix, but the solution seems like it's in our reach. So why aren't the numbers improving? And that's what we're going to talk about today. As always, there'll be no edits to the podcast. We're just going to have some conversation and see where it takes us. And with that, let's start the show. All right, as we get started today, I just want to go over a couple quick changes. Sometimes we'll have a co-host this season, and sometimes we won't. In season 1, we had a co-host each episode, but now we're going to kind of depend on the guest and the topic. And Gretchen, who is my co-host for most of season 1, will be guest hosting, but fortunately for her and unfortunately for us, she just took a teaching position at a university, so on top of all her other jobs, her schedule's a little more limited, but she will be back on for some guest episodes. And as always, check out researchthenews.com. It has all of our links that we talk about today, so whether that's statistics or articles, they'll all be there. Now I'm going to intro our guest. Kareem Weaver is the co-founder of FULCRUM, an organization in Oakland, California, whose goal it is to ensure that every child is an on-time reader with full literacy. And he previously led a development organization that supported the professional growth of teachers, and he was also a teacher and administrator himself in both Oakland as well as Columbia, South Carolina. He's also in a new documentary called The Right to Read, which was produced by one of my childhood heroes and the guy who should be hosting Jeopardy, LeVar Burton. And I learned about his work through an article in Time magazine called The Push for Phonics, which discussed a massive effort to change the way kids are taught to read. And that's what we're going to talk about today. And remember, if you dislike what either of us are saying, keep on listening, because hopefully you'll at least understand us. Kareem, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, glad to have you on. I just, for our readers, I want to go talk a little bit about the research coming into this. That documentary I watched, there's some podcasts we'll link to on researchnews.com. And it was amazing to me that literacy is such a big problem in this country. And I feel like it's something that was even more amazing that we don't really talk about it. And today, I think Kareem's going to do most of the talking. But before we get started, I wanted to use my lack of educational experience in the school system to try to explain to listeners what is currently being taught for reading and what works for reading. So do you mind if I take a stab at that, Kareem?
No, man, go ahead.
All right.
Go ahead, Ray.
So typically throughout history, phonics was what was taught. And that started, I think, in the mid to late 1800s. And what phonics is sounding out letters and trying to put together the sounds that letters make, and you can learn to read by sounding words out. But in the 1960s, whole language reading kind of came into vogue. And what that was coming up with words that make sense using what they call a 3-cueing system. So you see pictures, you look at context, and you try to put together words you know from this. And the goal isn't accuracy, but understanding the text. And one of the big things that I saw as a problem with this is the founder, the person who came up with whole language reading, for example, said that when a student reads something like the man is on a horse, that is, if they say the man is on a pony, that is basically the same thing, which to me is not the same thing at all. And I think that's a huge problem. But what kids do is they look at these pictures on the screen and say, oh, that man's on a pony, and they might misuse the word. But They at least understand the whole text at a certain level. And what's happening now is balanced literacy has become a thing. And that's kind of, in theory, teaching both, where you teach phonics, but you also teach the holistic view of reading the whole language reading. But from the documentary and from some of the research that I've seen, it tends to still be focused on the whole language reading, which, as far as I know, has been completely disproven as a good way of learning to read. So that is my layman's take. What did I get wrong, Kareem? What would you add on to it?
I say, look, I give you a C plus B minus.
all right. I'll take that.
That's a passing score. You know, you can see your way to graduate with that. But you got the general points right. I mean, there's more to it than just phonics, but that's kind of the heart of it. You know, do you actually teach kids directly how to do something, or do you let them experience their way through it? That's basically what it comes down to.
Yeah.
And, you know, we have this culture about self-discovery and erudition and, you know, and that's all fine. But, you know, you got to teach kids. It comes down to, do you teach directly? In fact, I had a meeting with the chief academic officer of a charter network. This is a few years back when I first started this work. And I was explaining to them, you know, what the situation was, what the challenge was. And the chief academic officer looked at me and he said, and sincerely, he says, but what does this do for our philosophy of self-discovery, of kids figuring things out on their own? And what you're saying makes sense, but I don't understand how you connect those two. And I looked at him, and I've known him for years, and I said, man, you know, my organization and the NAACP, it's our duty to treat you like a crack house. Because what your philosophy is doing is that much damage to our community.
Wow.
He just looked at me. He's an African-American guy. He just looked at me. I was like, man, I don't know how else to make it plain to you, the damage that you're doing. You got to teach kids. You can't expect them to know something. And this isn't hocus pocus. Teach them, and then we'll see from there. So you did a pretty good job summing it up, but it's just about, do we teach them directly all the pieces and have them, you know, build their knowledge and build their skill and build everything else? Or do we, you know, just kind of do it through osmosis and experiential learning and all the rest?
Well, I think, you know, that was when I was watching these documentaries and listening to these podcasts, that's the thing that kept coming back to me. I got a little bit angry as someone who had learned to read fairly early, and my grandfather always encouraged me to read. And so watching the documentary and seeing some of the good parents who are really trying to help their kids, that was some of the support I got at home from my grandfather. And I just kept thinking, why do we teach this way? And so, you know, I started digging in and seeing that obviously curriculum is a huge, huge thing. And there's a woman, Jessica Calkins, I believe is her name, that does a lot of the curriculum, that they're trying to change that over, but it's in a third of the classrooms. Why are we still teaching this? Is it that there's like, in my head, I started thinking, is there some kind of weird curriculum cabal, or are teachers just not aware of other options? Why do you think we're teaching something that's as bad as crack when it comes to?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Lucy Calkins, her name is Lucy Calkins. Her curriculum is very, very popular. And there are others too. She's not the only one. There are some others. And first of all, we got to recognize that publishing is big business. Big business. And imagine having customers that have to buy your products every couple of years. You know, that they spend hundreds of millions of dollars around the country on new books and new materials and all the companion guides and teachers editions and this and that every year. Some of these publishers are for profit. A very few of them are nonprofit. You know, I met with some of the CEOs, and they told me, Kareem, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our shareholders to give the customers what they want. So I was blaming them and mad at them. But what they were saying to me was, hold on, wait a second. We just giving the teachers and principals and superintendents and everything what they're asking for. We don't tell them what to do. We respond to their requests and we sell it. And I had to step back and think about that. there's some truth to that. They're not the university putting out these methods. They're not, the culture within education. So who's responsible for it? The hard answer is we are. Because while we're so busy with everybody else and everything else, we're sitting here looking at it. We're too busy to pay attention to our kids, is the bottom line of it. And we're letting this nonsense go on in schools every day across the country, red, blue, independent, you name it. It happens everywhere. And we're too busy. And I think the pandemic actually shook it all up, because for the first time, a lot of parents saw their kid in the living room being taught how to read on the screen. And I'm like, wait a second, what are they doing over there? What did she tell you to do? Yeah. You're supposed to look at, and so the game kind of is up at that point. So I think for us, it's paying attention more. But Lucy Calkins is one curriculum, her units of study, and they're adapting it. To her credit, she has acknowledged some of the issues and is trying to fix it. I mean, but the damage is done, man. I mean, right. What are you going to do?
And I saw some articles recently that was changing, but it seemed to be after a ton of pushback from people like you and other organizations and parents, and it still seems to be a big hesitancy to change that, which inside I was getting pretty upset that this was still being taught and that there were people holding on to this, because it doesn't seem, all the research keeps coming back that this is wrong. And I was listening to a podcast from a woman named Emily Hanford, and she was talking with a principal. First off, Lucy Calkins, I said Jessica, Lucy wouldn't appear on her podcast, which I was pretty upset about because I wanted to hear her side of things. Yeah. But she was talking about how she contacted a principal in Oakland who said there wasn't enough information and they were committed to the curriculum they had invested in. And those were the words of investing in this curriculum kind of gave me a little bit of a yellow flag of, what is it? And I started looking up some of the numbers, and I tried to find, you said just now a couple $100 million in curriculum, and I tried to find numbers for how much was out there. And the only thing I could find was from a St. Louis, Missouri school district, Rockwood, that they had one of their bottom line budget items out on the internet, and they spent for 22,000 students, $25,000 in one fiscal year just on Lucy Calkins' curriculum. So that's over $1 a student, and there's 76 million students in the U.S. So you start doing the math, and
man, that's not it. Then you have, on top of that, you have the professional development, the training, the supplemental materials, the licenses, all of it's a cottage industry. It's not even a college; it's a metropolis. Yeah, it is, and business is booming because we have to educate these kids. It's part of the Department of Education. Free and appropriate education. Everybody got a right to it. Okay, but what's appropriate? And that's the challenge. So I'll put it to you like this. Imagine, how you're a kid and you ride with your parents, and you see your mom or dad driving a car, and you've been doing it for a while. You're 8 or 9 years old, and you're thinking, "Man, I could do that." Yeah. I see him driving every day. I could do that. I could drive this car. Yeah. I bet you if I had to, I could drive this car. Now, there are some kids who, for whatever reason, they can pull it off. There's an emergency, somebody got to get to the hospital, and you see a kid sitting on phone books with leg extensions, and they figure that thing out. Most kids crash on the way to wherever they're going. And that's the same thing it is with literacy right now. It is, a small percentage of people that can figure it out just by watching and being read to. They're passengers in the car, and they see this. They can figure it out. But the majority of our kids are crashing on the way. So we can debate about the kind of car it is or the curriculum. Sure. Would it be easier if it was a Yugo or as opposed to Explorer? Sure. But at the end of the day, you have to teach somebody how to drive. You got to teach them how to read. I'm not saying you need a license or this or that, but you have to at least teach them how to do it so they don't wreck their lives and wreck others too. And that's the same thing with our kids, man. Our kids, they're not magicians. Yeah. They're just kids. And they love being read to. The materials sometimes are engaging. And there's some people who say, well, let's make the curriculum more fun. And this is, or more tied to their culture. On their language background, and all that's fine. All that's fine. But here's what they don't realize. Good teaching is the answer for that. You could give me the most boring, dry curriculum. And if I'm a great teacher, I breathe life into that thing. My mentor teacher, rest in peace, Dorothy Shanks, she told me one day, she said, Kareem, I could teach any kid, anytime, anywhere. That was her attitude. And she meant that thing, and so the curriculum matters. Yes, it does. But it's also the educators. They matter. And learning the science of reading, not just how to do a curriculum, learning what has to be taught, figuring out what kids need, whether they have dyslexia or they just a regular Johnny who needs to be taught the ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, and how to put it all together to make a sentence and a story, etc. Yeah. So we got a long way to go, man. A long way to go.
Well, I think one of the stats I heard that ties back into what you just said when I was doing some of the research here was that they think 40% of kids will learn to read no matter what. And I think that ties in with what you said, that some kids will just grasp it. But when I heard that, I thought to myself, it doesn't seem like, going back to you saying, we're not teaching. And I'm actually doing some college courses in mathematics right now, and I have 2 different professors, and one of them is very good at explaining. I don't want to know, here's the answer and here's the quick way of getting there. I want to understand what's happening behind the numbers and what's happening and what's causing something to happen. That's what I strive for. So I end up going on YouTube and looking up videos of like kids algebra, because it's getting me back into remembering how to actually do this work. And I think that's the part where, when I see this whole language reading where you're just telling kids, just guess and just try to figure it out, that doesn't at all seem like teaching and educating. It seems almost to me, from a computer perspective, of machine learning. We throw a bunch of stuff at them and hope it sticks. And that seems like the wrong way of doing it. But what do the teachers think? Because I feel like we've talked a little bit about administrators so far, and we know that you're fighting against this. And one of the teachers I saw in the Right to Read documentary seemed almost in tears because she didn't know what she could do to change things. And so, generally speaking, are teachers kind of stuck in the old way? Do they want something new? What do you get for the vibe there?
Right now, teachers are confused because, understand, the universities who prepared them and the licensing boards that gave them their credential, etc., most have been taught a certain way. Yeah, they've been taught the look-see method, but and the evidence about what works has been mixed. They haven't really had a situation where kids were thriving at scale. But everything you've been taught, all your training, all your background, the money that you spent in this university, telling you one thing, now all of a sudden there's this movement to say, wait a second, there's a different way. And it actually is an older way, more established, but we're not doing it. They're like, wait a second, what are you talking about? And if they deviate from the script, oftentimes they're punished. In Oakland, one of the best educators I know was chased out of Oakland because she had the nerve to say this wasn't right. Because if you say it's not right, you're questioning authority. Now it's about power and control. Yeah. Teachers have a contract, and they serve at the pleasure of the superintendent, basically. And it's like, they know something's not right, but what are you going to do? A lot of teachers just close their door and do the best they can. And you see teachers, online getting resources or using their own curriculum or whatever it is. Man, that's tough. You can't slip and slide your way through your career. You have to work together with your colleagues, et cetera. So teachers are in a confused state right now. And I will say this, there is a movement or a tendency to blame teachers for things. And maybe some do deserve blame, sure. You go along and get along. At some level, you're responsible for what you do, sure. At the same time, they feel betrayed. Betrayed. They spend all this money, time, and energy to do the best they could to get results for kids. And now it's all broken down and people are pointing the finger at them. There's a sense of betrayal because I don't see many superintendents and chief academic officers and school board members raising their hand and saying, we blew it. We gave y'all the wrong curriculum. We said the wrong thing. We went with the trendy stuff. It was wrong. It's not the teacher. They're not saying that. They're on to their next job, their next career, and they're not tripping. And they left the teachers holding the bag. Now the teachers are like, man, I did what they told me to do. What do you expect from me? So a lot of it is betrayal, is frustration, because it's sobering to think that you've been doing something for years and you weren't serving kids the way they needed
Right.
to be served. And that's a hard bag to hold, man. So right now, teachers are going through it, and they're being tasked with learning things all over again. And who's responsible for that? Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to value their time? I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. So,
Well, I think I do encourage everyone to watch this documentary when it's released. There's screenings across the country, because I don't think you can watch this and not have compassion for the students, for the families, for the teachers. One thing in my research that came up, though, going back to administrators versus teachers, I started looking at the number of administrators versus teachers. And I wonder if you have some thoughts on this. So I looked up some DOE, Department of Education stats. And for elementary and secondary teachers from fall of 2000, there was 97,000 administrators, 141,000 principals, and 2.9 million teachers. Fall of 2019, which was the last year of stats, it was 182,000 admin, 193,000 principals, and 3.1 million teachers. So teachers went up by 8.7%, while principals went up by 36%, and admin staff went up by 87.6%. So you talked about spending money and how it's a resource problem, but I look at that and I say, why aren't we? Do you have any thoughts on, is that a problem with we need more teachers, or we just need to reassess funds, or is that the right way? Should we be spending 87% more in admin?
I have something, it's probably, and nobody gonna like this one, but it's not about the money.
Yeah.
It's not about the ratios. I mean, listen, all that stuff matters. That's true. And we need more teachers. They need to be paid more, first of all. Like just in general, you ought to be able to buy a house in the neighborhood you teach if you've been teaching kids and doing a great job. And why you have to live 50 miles outside of town to afford it, that's a whole nother question, right? But when I say it's not about the money, man, these school districts have a ton of money. It's what they spend it on.
Yeah.
They spend it on nonsense 9 times out of 10. They're not spending it on people. They're not spending it on professional development and training. I'll give you an example. When they have a new curriculum, most of your listeners, if you had to pick a new reading curriculum, what would you do? Like if you have a year or a year and a half to choose it, how would you do it? Would you go visit your neighboring, look for somewhere that's working? Maybe go ask some questions, read some research. Maybe you have a team of dedicated people to figure it out.
Yep.
Not your school districts. They look to see what their neighbors are doing. They see who has the best brochure. They get a committee together of whoever has the time and bandwidth to actually do it, and then they vote. And it's like, wait a second, how about we take some time to go look around the country to see what's working best? How about we do some research and read what these curriculum actually have to offer? But for the most part, teachers, and I'd say administrators too, I'm going to shift this a little bit, right?
Sure.
There's another aspect to this. So I'm not just giving everybody a mulligan. You can't just do the wrong thing and not have your finger on the steering wheel. It's your class. You the teacher. You the principal. You the educator. You the superintendent. I mean, when I taught, I used the materials that I needed to use to get the results I wanted to get for kids. It cost me a lot of money, which was terrible. But what was I supposed to do? Have kids guess words?
Right.
What the sector has to come to grips with is the fact that in order to make sense of the results we were getting for kids, we had a choice to make. Do we look at ourselves and what we're doing? Or do we look at these other factors outside the kids and point the fingers there? And collectively, we chose to do that. And that is something that we have to account for. And when you're engaging with parents and community, like there's a reckoning that has to happen. So we talk about poverty. Oh, they're so poor. They're so traumatized in these rural areas in Appalachia or these inner cities or whatever it is. They're just, these are like the lower parts of society. And so these kids are handicapped. They can't learn anyway. So what are you going to do? Like, we actually bought into that as a sector to explain away why we weren't doing what we were supposed to do, why we weren't doing what the research said gets the best results for kids. So we got to look in the mirror and be like, you know what? What is it about us that when the chips were down, instead of checking ourselves, looking in the mirror, we pointed our finger at these kids and their families and their communities? Is that that little boy in rural Kentucky? Is he defective? The little white boy whose parents are strung out or in some opioid use, whatever, is he? So he can't be taught. What about the little Latino kid who's coming from parents that don't speak English? Is he unteachable now? You can't teach her? Or what about the little black child who, like all these, we start pointing fingers at all this other stuff, and that's a reflection on us and who we chose to show up as when the chips were down. Because when the chips are down, we could have said, wait a second, what are we teaching? Is this working? Let's look at the materials. Let's look at our training. Let's look at all these other factors. No, we didn't do that. We turn to the kids and say, oh yeah, they're broken. Yeah. This is the wretched of the earth, So there's a lot to account for. And sometimes it's just best to wipe your hands of it and walk away. And a lot of people are doing that right now because it's too much dissonance to hold.
Yeah. I mean, I love what you just said. And I think this is one of those times where I think there's probably a lot of issues we may come from different perspectives on, you and I, based on our backgrounds. But I think that everyone tends to want the same thing in the end. And this is part of the thing we want to do here in the podcast, is talk about what are some solutions and what are some ways we can come to agreements. And that's one of the things I get frustrated with. When I tell people I'm fiscally conservative, people get really like, you were born rich and you just had, all of this great background that you want to keep your money. And it's like, no, I was actually on welfare and food stamps and had a ton of issues, but I want to spend money on the right things. And that's the same thing you're saying here. I mean, I don't mind if we have the same budget for schools. I just want to spend on the right things and don't want to feel like my money's being wasted. And the part you talked about with kids being handicapped, that's the problem I see on both the right and the left. I feel like the right tends to not put any stock in home life and historical factors. It's just pull yourself up by the bootstraps and you have no excuses. And it's like, well, you're coming from a disadvantage. And then on the left, it's like, well, if you do have a disadvantage, you're handicapped, you're going to struggle, just deal with it and try to fight against the social issue instead of trying to better yourself. And that was one of the things I saw in the documentary. There was a mom and dad who were working with a kid named Fred Jr. And man, I'm rooting for Fred Jr. Oh my goodness, little Fred. Oh my goodness. That kid, his parents were amazing. And mom was working 3 jobs, working overnight. The dad was at working as well, but they were doing whatever they can to help their kid and even moving them to a different school district. And that's the part that hit me when they talked about moving him to a different school district to get better education. When you're born with wealth and when you're born with money, you don't have to worry about this public school system, because if they're not teaching something that works, you take your kids to a private tutor or you move them to another school district. Whereas when you are poor, I mean, the fact that those parents said that they wanted to move to a different school district was shocking to me, not because they aren't doing the right thing or I didn't think they would care about their kid, but just trying to understand how you do that when you're working that many jobs and trying to just get by, putting that as the focus. It's amazing to see parents who are like that. And I want to be able to give those parents the opportunities that they need to succeed and be able to give them the tools they need.
If you're working hard and doing the right thing and trying your best to make it as an individual, as a family, you're doing everything you can do.
Yep.
And you assume that when your kid goes to school, they're going to at least have a chance. Yep. If they do their part, right? They're going to use this public institution. They're going to do the best they can. And then come find out that oftentimes that's not the case. It's sobering. A common theme throughout the country is 2 things. One, a lot of parents and families send their children to other relatives so that they can go to a different school, because your address has to be a certain thing to qualify for this one. Or they move, or they lie and say we live someplace where they really don't live. Right. They use somebody else's address to mail comes to the other person. Like I did it. My nephew came to live with me. What were we supposed to do? Let him just struggle and this. So that's the first thing. You got this kind of underground railroad of people trying to navigate the system because they know the truth. Forget the bumper stickers and the slogans. They know the truth. And that school ain't teaching kids, for whatever reason. Then you have folks who have the money. And when you have money, the assumption is everything is all right. And that's not true. Because just like you said, People spend money on private tutoring all the time. All the time. The way we teach reading, it's not working for them either. It's not working for folks who are well-heeled, who just happen to be doing well in life. It's not working. So you see these places like Kumon and Sylvan and these little tutoring centers. That's the cottage industry. That's if I had to put money in somewhere as an investor, I'd put it there because they're all over the country because kids can't read. They go places where they know people have the resources. They're not going to let their kids fail. So they send them to Kumon to learn the things they should have learned in school. These type of things are happening all over the country as parents are trying to figure it out and save their kids.
I mean, one of the podcasts I was listening to talked about tutoring in New York City being $400 an hour for reading with some of those private schools. And I mean, geez, I'm thinking about switching to being a reading tutor.
What would you pay? What would you pay to save your child? What would you pay, man? What would you pay? If it's in New York or Beverly Hills or Palo Alto or Oakland or anywhere else, how much would you pay? If you know your kid's not getting what they need, would you pick up a second job? Would you pick up a third job?
Right.
Would you pay the $100 an hour for the tutor or not? Do you just let your child suffer and say, oh, well? Parents got to make this call on top of your regular bills, on top of your other commitments. That puts strain and stress on families because, when you're living on the razor's edge already, you may not have that kind of bread. You may not have that kind of money.
Right.
But the reality is parents have to answer that question. Okay, how committed are we to making it so that this kid can survive, or do we just let it go and leave it to chance?
I love it. Now, one of the things we like to talk about here is not just the problems, but the solutions. And when you talk about that, instead of forcing this onto parents, whether they're low income or high income, because it didn't seem like this was the teaching method didn't seem to be focused primarily on lower income settings. It seemed to be pretty prevalent everywhere. But when you say we need to spend money on the right things, where does some of that money go that's the right things? Is it strictly the curriculum and changing what that looks like, or is it a more holistic approach?
Well, you got to spend money to get good curriculum. It's got to be attuned to the research. You got to have good assessments. You have to have good intervention programs. When kids aren't reading, you got to be able to help them, have safety nets. And there's some really good programs out there for safety nets. You have to provide quality professional development, understanding that the universities aren't doing what they're supposed to do. I've been in universities talking with deans and their faculty and listening to them. And matter of fact, I was at a very prestigious university and engaging with them about this whole topic and how they teach reading. Because I also work with the NAACP. I'm on the education committee for Oakland. I was on the California State Conference Ed Committee, and I'm no longer on that. I'm only on the local. But we talk with the universities and the colleges, and we challenge them and we ask questions. I'll never forget. So I'm in this meeting. The dean is there. The faculty is there. They brought all the faculty in. And they're debating about this. They're talking in front of the dean. The dean thinks they're going to call in their professors and they're going to share with the NAACP what's working. Come find out, the professors are arguing right in front of the dean. The Methods 1 teacher is debating with the Methods 2 teacher. They've had this long-standing feud for 20 years. And the Methods 2 teacher basically says, I've had to teach Methods 1 and Methods 2 because she's not teaching what she's supposed to be teaching. So at the highest level of our institutions, there's a debate that has been going on to the detriment of our kids. So you can't really count on the universities to get their act together. I would say funds going to these public universities should be tied to a commitment to teach kids how to read and to have some accountability for them learning it. They shouldn't be able to just teach any old thing to the teachers. They're spending their hard-earned money, and the public is subsidizing these universities. We should expect that you're giving the people the tools they need to serve our kids. So money's got to go. Until that's fixed, money's got to go to professional development. Teachers should not have to come out the pocket after buying their way through college, their tuition and everything, and then, learning all the stuff they had to learn. They should now have to go back and pay thousands of dollars to learn how to teach reading on their own. When they're barely making enough money to pay the rent, they need the state or the district or the county should be paying for their professional development. They should be providing them a stipend to value their time so that they can go and learn what they need to learn for our kids. But that's where the money should be going, man. The teachers, and all these other things I just named. The American Federation of Teachers has a website. And it has the elements of an effective reading program.
Okay.
It's phenomenal. It's fantastic, and they've had that for 15 years. The problem is we're so busy arguing about everything else, that we don't really pay attention to it.
So I think there's two things there I want to touch base on. One is the arguments over some of the theory behind things, and the other is what actually, how can you tell if something is good or not? Other than testing, lack of testing is shocking to me. I think there was the NEA test is the only reading proficiency test. I forget the acronym is, but the lack of testing to see if these programs are working was pretty shocking to me. But when we go back to the theory, I think this is something that I have a frustration with higher education, is the fact that in theory, a lot of these ideas sound great. Even the idea of the whole language reading, to me, as someone who likes to look at the whole picture, sounds great in theory, but in reality, it doesn't work. And one of the quotes you had in the Time magazine article that you mentioned, I want to just kind of touch base on, was you said that regarding phonics, you said this seems dehumanizing, it's colonizing, it's the man telling us what to do. And that was a kind of a common theme with teachers. And they abandoned what they worked because they didn't like how it felt to the adults. And so can you talk to me a little bit more? Because that was one of the things I found confusing, was what is dehumanizing about phonics or about this method of teaching, and why are people kind of thinking that? And is that theory prevalent and a big problem?
So, look, man, you have to understand who our teachers are, who our educators are. Okay, they wouldn't be in those positions if the system didn't work for them.
Yeah.
The way things were taught worked for them. About 5% of people are going to learn to read pretty much on their own. You got another 30 to 35% that are going to learn to read in any variety of methods you use: whole language, pictures, balanced literacy, Montessori method, whatever. Like, they'll figure it out. Just teach them something, they'll pick it up. Everybody else, it's going to be tough. Like, you have to actually teach them step by step to crack the code. And some are going to need some diagnostic support. You got kids with dyslexia and all that. So who do you think is teaching? Who do you think are the principals and the supervisors it's that 35% that it worked for. So for them, it doesn't come from a place of malice. They're seeing the struggles of kids, and they're at wit's end to make sense of it. And they're thinking, well, by and large, the best thing I could do, the most loving thing I could do, is to do for them what was done for me, to teach to them the way I learned it, not realizing that they're the survivors of a system that doesn't work for the majority of the people, and the way that worked for them is not going to work for everybody else. That's one of the biggest challenges we have, is this learner's bias. So, in terms of, I want to make sure I get your question. In terms of how, they're perceiving it, or why they allow things to happen, and all the rest, or how we move away from that, there's some humility that has to happen. We have to question our assumptions. There's politics involved too. I hate to even go there, but there's some of that. If it worked for me, it must be the right way. But beyond that, politically speaking, like, I want kids to be affirmed. I want them, it's a very loving, caring approach. Some would call it a progressive approach. It's wanting to affirm the kids. Well, that's all fine and well. We want to affirm the kids. We want their identities to be formed. We want them to have belief in self and their community. That's all wonderful. But, my position is the best way you can do that is teach them how to read. Then they can go read about Dr. King. They can go read about Malcolm X. They can go read about whatever whatever their thing is. Let's not make assumptions and prescript who and what they'll be. Instead, let's give them the tools to unleash their own potential and develop as they want to develop. Them, their families, and communities need them to be. You got to back off. The ideologies are killing kids. Like, let's stop explaining away the issues. and let's just teach the kids. Like, the politics is stifling. And like I say, oftentimes our the way we do things comes from a good place. Education is a profession of helpers. Like, we want to do good. That's what you want to do. And if you're going to be a teacher or a principal, but at the same time, you can't just rely on your own frame of reference, because it'll betray you. Because the way we learned it, we're the survivors of the system. Now, you go to prisons, it's a whole different ballgame. They're reading about between third and fourth grade level. In fact, the Office of Justice, or the Department of Justice, about 25 years ago, came out with a report basically saying, these young people that are coming into prison, we got to reduce the recidivism, because they go, they come back, they go, they come back. The best way to do it is to teach them how to read. This is what our prison system was saying 25 years ago. We got to teach them how to read. And when they come in labeled as being handicapped or disabled, what we found out is they just can't break down words. And that the teachers, like, it's amazing when you read it. And so that's why, 25 years later, here's the First Step Act. Trump signed it, and this is part of the criminal justice reform stuff, basically saying, okay, let's now take it seriously. Clearly, the education sector is not going to change. So we're going to have to change and make sure that we're going to screen people for dyslexia when they come into prison, the federal penitentiary. We're going to give them the help they need to get a GED. But it shouldn't, man, I don't think anybody in our society is thinking that the federal penitentiary should be the first place people get screened for reading difficulties, or that should be the place where people get the help they need to learn to read. Now, unless the most cynical among us, maybe, but most Americans would say, nah, that's not the way we want to do things. So we just have to shift our thinking, man. It's possible, it's doable, but parents, teachers especially, and leaders have to put their hands on the steering wheel and be humble, acknowledge what went wrong, and say, okay, let's commit to doing something different. And as a parent, I'm not going to let you spin me around and talk over my head. I don't care about all that edu speak. I just need to know, is what you're doing following the research? When are they going to learn their sounds? What sound and when? What week? I want to come see it. Don't tell me my kid is a level K or L. What does that mean? Can he sound out these words?
Yeah.
And are they understanding what they read? So we have to take a step back and move away from the political analysis of everything. I mean, it's important. It's important. You got to go there. I get it. You got to go there. I'm willing to go there with you. And this is a we thing. We all got to figure this out, because if we don't do it right, then everybody's clutching their purse and they walk down the street, because you don't know what a person who can't read is going to be, pushed into a situation to do. When they're homeless and have no place to lay their head at night, and here you come with $100 purse, what you think is going to happen? So it's something for all of us to resolve.
It's I never thought about that connection until you just said it, and I cheated and looked up some stats here, and I wanted to see what percentage of prisoners who can't read, and it's estimated at 75%. That is crazy. Right. So what we argue about in elite ivory tower spaces, right? The people on the ground, and our prison system is the most, it just lays everything bare. I'll give you an example real quick. So I used to be an administrator at a juvenile justice facility. This is in South Carolina. And it probably was illegal. I told the story only once before. It probably was illegal, but, sadly, I hate to say it like this, man. I'm just going to keep it real with you. Sadly, It's like nobody cared. Nobody cares. Like, whatever. They locked up for a reason. If you can get them to act right, good. Go ahead and do it. We actually took volunteers of kids and took them to church. Oh, wow.
I took them to church because, in the South, you got Sunday school, right? They do Sunday school and everything. So we took them to Sunday school. Man, it took all of one Sunday for everything to change. Because in Sunday school, you got to read the little, they have little, I don't know, little tracks, little pamphlets, your lessons. They couldn't read the lessons. So these old ladies were like, oh no, these babies, what are y'all doing? And they can't read. So they taught them how to read. Mother Dewdrop and Mother Wardlow and all these people, they would teach them how. They're like, no, we got this. We got this. They would teach them how to read. Then they would take them to the kitchen and feed them. They had a kitchen in it. Now, this went on for months, and the kids loved it because they were getting attention. The church loved it because they felt that this was their mission. They're doing their thing. I had a young man who was scheduled to be released, back to whatever his situation was. He came back up to me, Weaver, man, well, I can't go back. What can I do? Can I just stay like maybe a couple more months? I'm like, nah, man, we can't. That's above my pay grade. You got to go when you got to go. Nah, man, I'm learning. I'm learning to read. Like if I just get a couple more months, man, imagine a young person begging to stay incarcerated because it's the only place that's teaching them how to read. These little old ladies with their little things teaching them sound out words and all this, and so that they could read the scriptures. So for us as a society, we have to make up our minds. What is ours so that they were doing it so that they could access that. Well, what's our so that? And I would submit we ought to be teaching these kids to read so that they have a fighting chance in life, so that they, our economy can flourish, so that our families can be stabilized, so that we're not spending all this money unnecessarily, so that we're not wasting their time and talent, so that the real pain that happens when a child is struggling to read is abated. You don't know how that's going to metastasize when a child can't read, the pain that it causes. And they start wondering, don't they care? Don't these adults give 2 cents about me and my future? They just going to let me fail like this? There's a sense of bitterness and enmity that happens with kids when they realize the adults just didn't care enough to help them. So we got to figure this out so that our kids have a fighting chance. And I always appreciate those old ladies in that church because they were like, no. I don't know what y'all doing over there. We going to teach these babies to read. We got it. Don't worry about it.
I love it. I mean, I love it and I hate it. I love the fact that that's happening, and I hate that it has to happen. I hate hearing that a kid wants to stay in prison to be able to learn. But, I worked before in an after-school program, and when it was faith-based, and seeing people come down. There was a woman. There was a basketball game we had one time, and her name was Miss Gale. Miss Gale was this older white woman. She had this group of kids that came down for this basketball tournament. There were about 6 to 8. I think they were all black kids from the inner city. Miss Gale comes down with her little umbrella, and she has like a little old tank top on, and she's reading her little book and like watching these kids play basketball. Those kids loved Miss Gale. You wouldn't, looking at the situation, they wouldn't stick out as like, wow, what that seems like they would have a great friendly relationship. They would hang out, but the kids did. They hung out with Miss Gale. They went to her house. They learned from her. But she really cared about the kids and really helped them grow. And that's the kind of stuff that I want to see happening, but not when they're in prison, when they're outside of prison. Right. And I mean, I think that's powerful what you guys did down there. Is that something that's still going on?
No, in fact, I think that juvenile justice facility, last I saw, it had transitioned to another use. But yeah, that was part of my assistantship when I was in South Carolina as a grad student. And like I said, I don't want to get them in trouble, but the only reason I even talk about it now is because I found out that they may have transitioned to something else. Yeah. But I was desperate enough to figure out something that worked. And that's the question, is like, are we desperate enough to fix this problem? Or are we, be honest, the adults, us, like, we're too distracted. We argue, we fuss and fight. I know it's red and blue, conservative and liberal, all that type of stuff. Like, we got plenty of stuff to debate. And are we desperate enough to prioritize our children? Or do we want to keep fussing and fighting about this or about everything else? Like, I honestly don't know the answer to that question yet. When I go into NAACP meetings, I'm asking this question. When I go to these other places, I'm asking that question. Y'all done yet? Can we focus on these kids yet? Or we gonna wait till or do we have to wait until your child goes to jail? It's not even going to jail. That's like a salacious thing. It's wait until your child experiences the pain.
Yeah.
I was reading about that Uvalde shooting in Texas. I wasn't surprised when I read the investigative report and it said the kid was Googling dyslexia on his computer before this, like, man, if you leave kids in the place of pain, and if you don't give them the help that they need, you just don't know what's going to happen. You just don't know. And it's a challenge for all of us, because here's the other thing. What we're doing actually works for some kids. Like you mentioned before, 35% or so of kids are proficient readers. What we're doing is working for some kids. It's working, right? And so the question is that enough? And we have to ask ourselves as a country, is that enough? What's our standard? Do we think our kids are somewhat defective? Do we think that, because it's not just kids of color or white kids or poor, like, this is everybody. Can we even do the everybody thing anymore? The everybody thing is out of vogue. Like we've done it in big projects. We're going to go to the moon. Okay, everybody's on board with that. We're going to do this. We're going to fight for civil rights at a certain point. At a certain point, everybody got on board with that. We have some everybody things. Do we still have that in us as a country to do an everybody thing? This is like a national works project. It just happens to be about our kids and what they need to survive.
I, as frustrated as I get with media, with Twitter, with certain people, pretty much all politicians, I think at the core of it, I do think we have the everybody in us. But the problem is the everybody are the silent majority. And I feel like there are so many people who want to see solutions, but they don't even hear about them. The fact that, all I hear about when I hear about education is the parents fighting against critical race theory or fighting to include more it's like critical race theory, it's social issues, it's transgenderism, it's all these things. And it's nothing about the education itself. That's what I hear about in the news. And that's where people get very passionate and emotional. And I think if anyone heard that 34% of kids were proficient in reading, if they aren't upset about that, they're not the kind of person I want to hang out with. But I would say 95% of the population is probably going to be upset about that. But we have this vocal minority of politicians, then media, and Twitter is just such a disgusting place where you get all these you go through Twitter and you think, man, we're going to have a civil war here soon. And like everyone hates everyone. And then you get out in public and it's like everyone pretty much likes each other. And so I do think that we do have an everybody mentality. We just need to get some of the people in power to get behind us. And I think when you look back at the history of slavery, with the history of civil rights issues, keeping all those things comes from power. And we always got to look at who's in power and challenge them. And I feel like that's not happening enough. And one thing I'll say, you're going to have to talk me off a ledge here, because I hear what you're saying. And you brought up the dyslexia thing for the Uvalde shooter. Yeah. And when I was doing some of the research, I had two kind of people that I got very upset at. And that was the Goodmans, who started the whole language reading system, and Lucy Calkins. Those people were on my list of people I was upset about. And one of the things that Goodman said when they were talking to him in the same interview, where he said that, it's okay if you confuse horse and pony because it's the same thing, which is just completely ridiculous to me. He said dyslexia isn't real, and all these things where I'm like, these are the people. Goodman created this program, Calkins implemented it, and for some reason we're still doing this. And it seems like it's not just that you're saying it's bad. We're seeing results that it's bad. Research is showing it's bad. Teachers are saying it's bad, and we're still doing it. I do want to talk about, you had said earlier, I want to talk about some of the good things that are happening and some ways we can fix it, but talk me off a ledge. Am I over? Should I not be mad at Goodman and Lucy? Because you've tried to kind of, I think, pull back some anger, but I don't know. They make me really frustrated.
Goodman just passed away. He just passed away not that long ago.
Oh, well, now I guess I shouldn't. Now you're making me feel bad. Yeah.
You let it go. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, that's an awkward timing. Yeah.
But I would say that, there's some people think that Ken Goodman was dyslexic himself, because what whole language is, his strategy, it's basically a theory about how to work around. It's one big workaround theory. Because if I struggle to read and decode, I'm going to get these workarounds. So he built a system of how to work around that. That's coming from the mind of a person who, but we normalize that and made that, but that's not it. So that's almost like learning Chinese or character languages.
Yep.
I'll learn the image. And I just learn these images. Well, for that language, that's cool. But this is a phonetic language. These romantic, Italian, French, Latin, Greek, English, Spanish. These languages, you crack the code, and you can. Anyway, I would say it's our psychology. You can look at Lucy Calkins stuff, and it's not about her, man. She did what she's doing what she's doing, and she's evolving, I guess. But what is it about us that makes that method chicken soup to the soul? Why does it feel so good? Why do we jump on the bandwagon with both feet and ride? Come hell or high water for our kids. I heard somewhere that you judge a tree by the fruit it bears. Well, what's the fruit? Like, if we don't have to go to Harvard to figure this out. We'll just see, is it working? Right. Man, it's not working. If it ain't working for the kids, then what are we doing? Who is it working for? Well, look at who's cashing these checks. Look at it. It kind of justifies. If I'm one of the 1/3 that it worked for, right? If I'm I'm a chief academic officer or a superintendent, it worked for me. Many of them feel that to say this thing didn't work for everybody then somehow diminishes their achievement. So you mean that what I got isn't all on my own? You mean that 2/3 of the population was outside of the competition? You mean that what I'm saying doesn't have actually, you got to just get over that. That's just the reality of it. 2/3 of your competitors never had a chance to get out the starting blocks. But it doesn't mean that you have to quit your job. It doesn't mean you don't have any credibility. What it means is you have to stop with the imposter syndrome. You have to stop acting like everything is okay when you deep inside know it's not okay. 2/3 of the kids aren't broken. 2/3 of the kids can't learn. Come on, stop playing. Let's be real about this. So what I would also offer is this. So you take Goodman and Calkins and others, and there are plenty of others. I don't want to just pick on them. Like I said, I'm happy to hear Calkins is starting to evolve. That's a huge sign, and I give her a lot of credit for even opening up that conversation, because there's others like Phonics and Pinnell who run Ohio, and they have $1 billion publishing game, and they're not budging. They're like, "No, we sticking with this. Y'all crazy." Yeah. We sticking with this. So I would rather have my eye directed for them, but whatever. But then you look at people like Marva Collins, the late, great Marva Collins, an educator who was in Chicago. And, she started her own school after working in the traditional public school. Man, she took kids, they were classified as being uneducable. Back when I was a kid, they would say retarded. And those kids graduated with honors from college eventually.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what did she do? Well, you know what she was doing? This little old black lady in Chicago was teaching, check this out. She was teaching kids how to sound out words, how to put them together. So she was doing the phonics stuff. She was doing the vocabulary. She had them reading the classics, Shakespeare and Thoreau and all this other stuff, and working to comprehend that stuff and to present it. So she was doing all these things, but it wasn't sexy. It wasn't involved. Why didn't that catch on like fire? Why? The program that we used in Oakland to make a lot of gains for about 6 or 7 years was basically the program that she built.
Yeah.
Open Court. But then we ditched it because it wasn't trendy. It wasn't popping, as they say. So we went to something else. But why don't we elevate what works? Forget the politics, forget the labels. Hey, what's getting the most kids to read around the country? What let's find that out. Let's do that. It's simple. As opposed to elevating somebody who, how many years did Lucy Calkins teach in 5th grade or 3rd grade or 1st grade? She was a middle school teacher, from what I understand. Nothing wrong with middle school teachers. But I'm just saying, if it has evidence of working, if you tell me, Kareem, all you got to do to get kids reading at a high level is take these plates, spin them on your fingers, close your eyes, and mumble under your breath, I'll be a mumbling, plate spinning, blindfolded person. I'm going to do what works. I don't care what it's called. But instead of doing what works, we're following behind people with no evidence of something that actually worked. It makes no sense. And most parents don't even know that. Most parents assume you drop your kid off at school. Yeah, they're doing what works. They to school. Man, the school's trying to figure it out. Teachers are hanging on for dear life with the materials they have, which were never intended to reach all kids. They only intended to reach about 40% of kids.
You know, what's crazy, Marva Collins, I read a book recently by a guy named Thomas Sowell, who I'm a big fan of. He's an economist. And he talked about Marva Collins in his book. And he mentioned that Reagan was looking at nominating her for Secretary of Education.
That's right. He wondered. And she said no. And I wish she hadn't said no. She said no, but I get it. Man, look, I get it. When you're a great teacher, all you want to do is teach. You can't get involved with, listen, so I was fortunate enough to be in a position of having an impact on kids. You couldn't tell me nothing. You barely, I mean, I was doing other things like coaching kids and doing this and that, but teaching was my bread and butter. And when the need is so great, you can't even envision yourself doing something else. Mm-hmm. So they came to her and they're like, listen, you've done great things. We would love for you to take this to a bigger stage. But she said no. She didn't even accept the nomination. It breaks my heart to this day. But I understand it. Great teachers love to teach. So, yeah, if she had been the Secretary of Education, I can only imagine the difference she'd have made.
I mean, hopefully we wouldn't be having this conversation. But it's crazy to think. I mean, but I think that's politics in general, it seems that it's not, I totally understand why someone would want to be in politics. I mean, back then we didn't have Twitter and a lot of things that make everyone look evil, but everyone's vilified. Everyone, you find the worst character traits, the worst qualities, drag someone through the mud. And the only people that want to do that are the people who don't care if they're terrible people. And that's why we have who we have in politics. But
well, Ray, you mentioned the politics before, and this is one time, I mean, think about that dynamic. So here you have a Black woman in Chicago, and you have Ronald Reagan, the president, wanting to nominate her. Now, he is a conservative. I don't know Marva's politics, but she's a Black woman educator and highly regarded in the community, nationally. But he was willing to say, oh, that's good. And he's willing to say, I want that for everybody's kids. And I think that's what it's about. Regardless of your political leaning, don't we want what's good for everybody's kids?
Right.
And that should supersede race, class, location, region, whatever, party affiliation. We don't have that kind of mindset today. It's like now we just stick to our tribe. If it's red, it must be right. If it's blue, it must be right. Whatever it is. Then the libertarians in the middle saying we don't know, but it's like there has to be a remnant in this country of folks that say kids first and to hell with the rest.
Yep.
We can argue and fuss and fight all we want to later, but right now, today, we got to save our kids. And for that to happen, I need you. I need you at the board meetings. I need you to put pressure on these curriculum companies. I need you to come to this principals meeting with me. I need you on the PTA. I need you to advocate to the legislator for initial screening for dyslexia and learning difficulties. I need you. We need each other. And our inability to do that will mean we perish as fools. So we'll see. We'll see if we're up for the challenge to do what we think, because that's really what we need right now.
Well, I love it. I always tell people I get very, very bored with talking with people who agree with me on everything. That's not a real conversation to me. That's not a real dialogue. And I feel like what you just said there is hitting the nail on the head. It's if someone disagrees with you now, you're evil. And I can't imagine, looking at a current president, doesn't matter party, looking at someone from the other side of the aisle and saying they're doing something right, because you don't want to give them the rub. You don't want to give them we're going to help out the other party. And it's not about party. It's not about politics. It's about kids. It's about prisoners. I mean, again, that 75%, this is the kind of stuff that comes up when you just have conversations. I mean, that's 75%. We did an episode about prison reform recently, and I'm all for it. And I think there needs to be there's a lot that needs to be addressed. We're doing an episode on police coming up this season, but I've never heard that 75% number of illiteracy until now. And it ties so much together and explains so much. And then you tie that in with dyslexia, with the Uvalde shooter, and people talk about mental health issues, but that to me is a mental health issue if you can't read, if you have problems learning. And I think it's so important to talk about these things.
Well, I'm gonna push on that. I'm gonna take that one step further. It becomes a mental health issue, but I want to make sure that people understand. Yes, dyslexia is real, and you got rates of about 50%. In between 40 and 50%. We've had 3 different studies, University of Texas and others, that said folks locked up dyslexia 40 to 50%.
Wow.
And having said that, I don't want people to think this is a niche thing. Like, oh, this is the kid with this. This is for the kids with disabilities. Man, this is your son and your daughter. This is your neighbor. This is everybody. Everybody. Our kids are struggling to read. I don't care how much money you have. You don't necessarily want to spend an extra, a grand a month to help to pay that tutor. I don't care how much money I have. I'm not just into lighting it on fire, if I don't have to, especially when you pay your taxes.
Yep.
This is an everybody problem, man. It's not just any one demographic group, but we can't help put everything in the terms of, the tribes. It's like, that's our prism, and we see these colors and we can't get out of that. We got to step back, man, and say, okay, wait a second. Okay. Surely there are differences amongst groups, language differences, class difference. Sure. Fine. Okay. Sure. However, I think we have to establish, not just for this podcast, but as a country, that actually our children have a common interest. And that as a public, we want to get the greatest number of kids reading as possible. And we have limited resources. So everything we do should be aligned with that goal. Is this going to get the greatest number of kids reading possible? Is there another way to do it that's going to get even more kids to do it? How much does it cost? I mean, just think about this. Here's something to you. There are a lot of districts who are now saying, hey, we're going to make a shift. We're going to go towards the so-called science of reading, whatever that is, the science of reading. Okay, we're going to get a new curriculum. Oakland is like this. They're fired up. In that movie that you referenced, the Right to Read film, Oakland made a shift, and I'm grateful. We've come a long way. We got a long way to go. But man, they chose a curriculum to do that takes anywhere from an hour to 2 hours a day to prepare for. Now, okay, you say, what's the problem with that? Well, if it takes between 5 and 10 hours a week to prepare for, and you only have contractually 100 minutes a week for teachers to prepare, what could go wrong? At the least, you're going to have some unprepared folks, who can't do what they're supposed to do. At worst, you're going to have a labor problem.
Yeah. Because
the message is either this is not that serious a deal because this doesn't line up, or we don't care. Figure it out. It's incomprehensible. We as adults have got to take a step back and look at the things that we're willing to accept and the assumptions we're making, right? And it's going to mean maybe getting over ourselves a little bit. It's going to mean we have to be humble a little bit and get out of our bags and our assumptions and all this to say, okay, what's the best thing we can do to get the greatest number of kids? Because it is happening in some places in our country. There are places where kids are reading. You mentioned the positive. Go down to Goose Creek Elementary down there in Kentucky. Go to Seaford, Delaware. I always talk about Seaford, Delaware, because they, nylon capital of the world. They, with people coming from Dominican Republic and Haiti, second language learners, and the white kids, the black kids, the low socioeconomic status kids, the high. Everybody's starting to read. The same district a few years back was one of the lowest in the state. What are they doing? Maybe we should go, ask some questions. Yep. Instead, we're like, no, we good. We're going to keep doing what we do. We'll figure it out. So we got to be curious and humble. And a part of it is being willing. So I'm from California, and we Californians have this thing where, we really don't want to hear too much what anybody else is saying. Maybe Massachusetts will listen to them. But other than that, we don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear what's happening in Mississippi. I don't want to hear what's happening, heaven forbid Georgia does something right. We don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
That's our political lens. So we got to get out of that bag too. Because maybe something in Mississippi is happening that's worth at least learning about and maybe even replicating. We got to be willing to learn from each other and be humble. So that's a big challenge too.
As someone who's not from California, I will say that I looked up some stats on poverty, and I was reading an article. It was a specific article about California education, and they listed themselves as, in the article, the highest poverty rate in the country. And I was like, that can't be true. That's not real.
Yeah,
And I looked it up, and Mississippi is number one when you look at just straight poverty levels. But when you look up something called supplemental poverty levels, which I didn't know what it was before. So for the listeners, it basically is anyone in the population who has money left over to actually buy things, fun things, or live life. So Clalifornia, they don't have as much poverty based on levels, but they have such a higher cost of living. They are the lowest and the highest in the country, except for DC, which I don't count that because they're not a state. But when you look, California is the highest in the country for poverty. It actually even beats out Mississippi. And so, I mean,
those are fighting words. You know, if you say something like that out here, they'll run, man, they'll get you with a broomstick. Because in our mind, this is like the bastion of prosperity out here. Yep. We look at these. You know, I'm a college football fan, and we turn on our TV and we look at these stadiums in Louisiana and Georgia and Mississippi. They're packed with people, just 80,000, 70,000, going crazy, yelling and all this. And we in California, like, what in the world is going on out there? How can they all be going to these games? It's because, they love the sport, but they also got a little money in their pocket to go to a sport. In California, man, you paying at least half your money that you make is going to your rent, if you can even afford it. Sometimes it's as much as 60 and 70%. People are house poor. So they have these big, nice houses sometimes. Sometimes it's just a shack and it still costs you $500,000. But they can't afford to do anything else. So now you layer on top of that, now you're paying high taxes and you have to pay for supplemental programs for your child to learn how to read. What are you going to do? So if you have the money, the uber wealthy, you might have a chance. But if you're just a regular person trying to make it day to day, maybe you're working 2 jobs, you and your spouse, good luck with that.
Yep.
Good luck with that. But the South, and it's not just the South, there's other regions too. Like, it's all about priorities and economies and all that type of stuff. And there's an economic component to all of this stuff. But at the end of the day, whatever system you have, however your economy looks, we can't be so wealthy and we can't be so poor that we're willing to throw our kids under the bus. That's got to be the first consideration. What do they need? There's a tribe in Africa, Sante, who when you meet them, they say, "And how are the children?" That's the greeting. It's like, "What's up?" It's, "How are the children?" And that's the question we should be asking ourselves. How are the children? Across all the demographics, how are they doing? And they're telling us if we'll listen, if we watch their actions, if we see how they comport themselves, how they thirst for attention. We talk about attention deficit disorder. Yeah, there's attention deficit, all right? Nobody's paying attention to them. Wow. And so because of that, they act in a disorderly manner, right? And so we just have to step back and ask ourselves, how are the children? Well, if they can't, back to your original point, if they can't read in the information age, what are they supposed to do? What are they supposed to do? They realize that the deck is stacked against them, and they're governing themselves accordingly, unfortunately.
Well, I love that you just said back to my original point, because I stole that line from you, and now I get to take credit for it in the future. I'm going to start using that and being like, I came up with this.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, it's my line now. Sorry, Kareem. I just stole it from you. But well, I think we talked a lot about the issues, and we talked a lot about some of the solutions. And I just, in wrapping up here, I just want to kind of hear a little bit about what you're doing at FULCRUM and what you see as kind of the next steps into actually solving some of these problems. I know there's been some progress, so if you want to talk about some of the progress you've seen or what's next and what are some big goals for you, I'd love to hear that to kind of wrap up.
So at FULCRUM, we're part of a coalition of groups that's led by the NAACP to really advocate for the districts using best practices, get better curriculum, provide better training and support, stop some of the things that don't really give good results for kids. So the first thing is, I would put this for everybody, we have to actually pay attention. We have to, it's like my grandfather said, you notice we always go to war during football season. So my grandfather used to say.
Yeah.
He said, every time football season is about to start, you could bet we're gonna start up. It's gonna be something that happened. Summertime, not so much.
Wow.
Football season, yeah. So we got to stop being distracted and keep the main thing the main thing. And you know, so at Fulcrum, what we're doing is we are, first of all, supporting this underground railroads of kids learning to read. So that's on the side. We do that, but we also engage with universities. We engage with districts, and we try to get them to teach adults how to do the right thing in terms of reading instruction. We work with any stakeholder. We connect with unions. We connect with the NAACP. We connect with parent organizations. We try to get them all on the same page. It's not easy, and it's not always fun, but it's the right thing to do. So I think the first thing we could do before we start trying to get the system to fix itself, we got to get our act together. Build coalition. Talk to your neighbor. Find out how your neighbor's child is learning to read. How's it going for your neighbor? What about at your youth center or at your church? How is it going? Why aren't we having Sunday school classes when we have all these kids? Is it because they can't read the stuff? What's really going on? Ask your church pastor, why don't we have a youth program? And why don't we do this? Why aren't we offering tutoring? There are some basic things we could do to get our houses in order as a society. And then we got to push on these school systems. That's district, county, and state. Every state is different. Everybody's got different rules and regulations about, how Department of Ed acts, but they need to be following the research consensus in the brain science. They need to have curriculum that works. If your curriculum is still using stuff that's balanced literacy based, whether it's Phonics and Pinnell or some of these other stuff, you should be, and if you're just sitting there taking it, good luck with that. Good luck with that. So you got to be aware, alert, go together in coalition to push to make sure that we get evidence-based practices. And you got to push on universities. Public universities shouldn't be getting the public money and not do the public good. You got to push on them because they're not going to do what they sell for the most part. Now you have some that are, aligned with the international dyslexia standards and, the latest in reading, sure. But most of the universities are islands among themselves. And they're not accountable to anybody. The public has got to push on them and demand that they prepare educators with the research consensus and the brain science on how reading skill is developed. So that's our charge. I know it's kind of convoluted, but go down to your school and see how they teach and reading.
Yeah, I mean,
ask them are they using best practices. And if you hear the words Phonics and Pinnell, you better be on it. Or if you hear Lucy Calkins' units of study or balanced literacy, you should be asking questions because there's something in the milk. Something's not right. And you don't want your kids to be the guinea pigs and experimenting on. Matter of fact, I'll end this thought with this. 1996, a parent, her name is Miss Victoria Jones. She came to me and she said, Mr. Weaver, I feel like Jabari, that was her son. I feel like they experimented on my son like a guinea pig in a cage.
Wow.
I will never forget that because he was taught whole language and all the rest. The boy couldn't read. He was experimented on. Do not let people experiment on your child. They're not lab rats. Go find out how they're being taught to read and determine if it's aligned to the science and the research consensus or not.
I don't think that's convoluted at all. That quote is heartbreaking, but I think the charge I 100% agree with. I don't have kids of my own, but when I see parents that are involved, when I worked with kids in after school settings, any kid who had a parent or a grandparent that was more involved, you could see the huge benefit there. And I think just that charge to get parents to find out what their kids are learning. And like you said, I think with the pandemic, people hearing the remote learning and seeing what's going on, I think that was a big push and it started things, but I appreciate what you guys are doing at Fulcrum, and I hope you keep pushing parents to go do that because that's where change gets made. So,
and I would also encourage people to get involved with organizations, whether it's NAACP or other organizations that have a platform that can get the attentions of these folks and say, listen, this is a civil rights issue. We need your help. You got a local NAACP, join it. Get on the education committee, get involved. It's a tool to use to actually get things done. And NAACP.org, people are welcome to go there and sign up and get involved using that vehicle as well.
Love it. Kareem, I have one last question for you now. Before we did a brief little intro talk and we talked about some of the best arms in baseball, so we're going to go off topic for a little while here. So Kareem talked about Dave Parker, who's a Pittsburgh Pirate who I grew up in Pittsburgh, right. And I brought up Roberto Clemente and Bo Jackson. And I don't know, I just got to say, I think we should both pick the best arm in the history of baseball. And I'm going to just limit it to these three: Clemente, Bo Jackson, or Dave Parker. Who's the best arm? Who's the best arm in baseball, Kareem?
You can't pick that. You can't pick that. You can. Well, okay. If I have to pick, I love Bo Jackson. I remember when he was throwing people out of defense in Kansas City. I get that, but man, Big Dave Parker.
Yeah.
Big Dave Parker on a big stage. Listen, I love Cespedes. I love, back in the day, Tony Armas. Y'all probably don't know nothing about these folks. I love all those arms. But Big Dave Parker with money on the line and the man on third base and the fly ball to deep right field, give me Big Dave all day long.
All right. Well, I'm still sticking with Clemente, even though he was before my time, but I just can't look at it. I mean, and I will say, like, just as a human being, I just have such a respect for Clemente. And
well, see, that's what you mix it in the social. But yeah, he's going places and doing things and donating stuff. I understand the Clemente, the legend, Clemente, the great, the activist. I respect that about him. But we just talking about throwing the ball. See, you just like these reading people. You get caught up in all the rest of the stuff, and you got to answer the question. You got to stick to the fundamentals. Who can throw somebody out at home when the game was on the line? That's Big Dave, man. Forget what you talk about.
I love always going back to logic in arguments, and that's one of my things. People are too big on emotion, and I can't believe you just called me out on that at the end of this episode. And it's accurate. I'm sticking with the emotion of it all. But
oh, man.
All right. Well, Kareem, thank you so much. I hope to actually have you back on the show at some point in the future, and I appreciate the conversation, and I also appreciate what you guys are doing. And I'm going to wrap up here at the end of the show by saying that you should check out The Right to Read. Great documentary. It's not out yet, but they're doing tours around the country. Check out that Time Magazine article. Get involved, like Kareem said. And on a side note, every episode we like to end with some kind of recommendation. And my recommendation this week on something I've been reading outside of this topic and listening to, a podcast called Conflicted. If you guys get a chance to listen to it, it's hosted by a guy named Eamon Dean and another co-host. And Eamon Dean was actually a Al-Qaeda bomb maker. And he was a jihadist. You don't understand that when you start hearing him speak, because he's such a nice, kind, seemingly gentle human being, but he was a bomb maker. Ended up becoming a double agent and was exposed accidentally by Dick Cheney, of all people, and is now doing a podcast with a fatwa. But it talks about when you talk about emotions and we talk about all of the people getting behind a specific tribe, I mean, he talks about what went into his time as a jihadist and how he got out of it and some of the struggles. But that's our podcast recommendation of the week, is Conflicted. And Eamon, if you're listening, we'd love to have you on the show sometime. But if you're out there listening, feel free to share this podcast. Thank you once again to Kareem, and we look forward to coming back with another episode soon.